A rail can pay a thief without breaking its own rules. On June 30th, 2025, C&M Software was compromised. C&M Software was a central bank-authorized PSDI, a payment service technology provider. Attackers spoke with institutional certificates and private keys the rail already accepted as client institutions. They sent protocol-correct PIX orders into SPI and SPB, real-time settlement debited reserve accounts at more than one client. The rail did not fail its format check. The rail obeyed a speaker it already trusted. How Brazil's PIX rail paid on a stolen certificate because the message was protocol valid. A stolen institutional certificate is still a speaking key. Third-party risk management (TPRM) has to score a payment rail the same way it scores a doorway, by what a valid grant can move, not only by whether someone entered the vendor. A review that only asks whether the provider can be entered will miss the review that should have asked whether a valid speaker can move reserve money before anyone can say no. That is the ask that belongs on the rail, not a smashed door score. PIX is Brazil's instant payment system. People and firms use it to move value in real time, under rules set by the Central Bank of Brazil. Instant is the feature customers want. Instant is also the constraint operators inherit. A rail that finishes in real time cannot put a loan officer, a fraud analyst, or a Tuesday committee between a valid order and a debit. The design pays first because the design is built to pay first. SPI is the instant settlement rail that clears a PIX order between institutions. A protocol-correct order that arrives on SPI is not a request for a human to consider. It is an instruction the rail is built to settle. SPB is the Brazilian payment system, the wider fabric those institutional connections sit on. The authorized path that carries an honest order on an ordinary day is the same path a stolen speaker will use. A PSTI, a payment service technology provider, is a licensed firm that connects client institutions to that fabric. Many institutions grant a provider the right to format, sign, and send orders on their behalf. The Central Bank of Brazil authorizes that class of provider because the rail cannot take unsigned noise. Authorization says this firm may speak in a form the rail will settle. Trust of that kind is not a compliment. Trust of that kind is a grant of voice. An institutional certificate is a signed identity the rail accepts as the institution speaking. The private key is the secret that makes that identity usable. Together they are a speaking key. A speaking key is not a password for a website. A speaking key is the voice the rail already agreed to believe. If the certificate is valid and the order is protocol correct, the rail has no second question about motive. Stolen or held by the treasurer, the key still speaks. The rail is not a mind reader. The rail is a protocol. Real-time settlement is the promise that a valid order becomes money before a human can hold it. That promise is why PIX replaced waiting. It is also why a stolen speaking key is an emergency, not a ticket in a queue. Batch rails leave hours in which a clerk can question a wrong beneficiary. A real-time rail spends those hours after the debit. Intent is a human word. Protocol is a machine word. The machine settles the protocol. It does not settle the story you wish the sender had meant. That is the design. The June case is what the design does when the speaker is stolen. Public reporting said the attackers held valid institutional certificates and the private keys that belonged with them for client institutions on that pipe. Valid is the load-bearing word. The rail would not reject those certificates as the wrong shape. Those keys already mapped to the institutions the rail expected to hear. A review that stops at perimeter hygiene will file a break-in and miss the payment lesson. The payment lesson starts after the speaking keys were already in hand. Attackers issued protocol-correct PIX orders into SPI and SPB. Protocol-correct means the message had the fields, the signatures, and the shape the rail requires. The rail is built to settle that shape. It is not built to telephone a treasurer and ask whether the treasurer intended the debit. Public reporting described those orders as looking like ordinary institutional traffic. Ordinary is the danger. Ordinary is what a real-time rail is optimized to pay. The debits landed on reserve accounts. A reserve account is the account a client institution holds at the Central Bank of Brazil for interbank settlement. It is not a consumer wallet. It is the balance the institution uses to settle with other institutions. When a protocol-valid order hits that account, the money has already moved in the only sense the rail cares about. More than one client institution sat on the same provider pipe, so more than one reserve account was in reach of the same stolen voice. Public reporting places the movement in the hundreds of millions of RIAs. About 800 million RIAs is the figure most widely repeated. Hold that number as an estimate. A later total can move without changing what the rail did. A protocol-valid speaker moved reserve money at rail speed. And that is the mechanism to keep. Nobody had to corrupt the rules inside SPI. Nobody had to invent a new message type. The product that finishes a grocer's transfer at noon is the product that settles a stolen order before the floor opens. That is not a complaint about PIX. That is the product doing the job it was built to do. The class showed up again. On August 29, 2025, public reporting described a second incident at Sinqia, also reported under Evertech. Attackers used legitimate IT provider credentials. About 710 million RIAs was attempted, and some of that was blocked or recovered. Treat those figures as public estimates. The short point is the same speaker lesson. A rail that believes a valid provider will pay, or will have to race a payment that already looks honest. The reserve account is on the client institution's side of the written contract. Customers, correspondents, and supervisors do not split a debit between the brand and the PSDI. A review that asked only whether C&M software had a policy binder was asking a paperwork question. The first question for a speaking key is whether a valid order from that provider can empty a reserve account before a human can intervene. Speaking key is the first ask. Who holds an institutional certificate that the rail will treat as us, where the private key sits? How many people, hosts, and vendors can use it? Whether the key that signs a PIX order is the same object a help desk password can reach. A speaking key that sits at a shared provider is a grant of voice to that provider. The review has to inventory voice, not only invoices. Real-time is the second ask. After a valid order is signed, is there any hold that is not theater? Can the institution delay, dual control, or cap a reserve debit? Or does SPI settle because the signature matched? A questionnaire that asks whether the vendor monitors fraud is not that proof. Proof is a control that can refuse a protocol-valid order that is still wrong for the business. If no such control exists, the review must say so in the written record. Shared pipe is the third ask. How many institutions speak through this one PSTI? How many reserve accounts sit behind one certificate store? How many honest orders share the path a stolen order will use? The Central Bank of Brazil later suspended C&M Software's SPB connection. An honest PIX traffic for every client on that pipe stopped with the fraud. Shared voice is shared outage. That fact belongs in the review before the grant is approved. Those three asks sit on one table because they travel together. Speaking key says who can sound like the institution. Real-time says whether anyone can stop a valid sound. Shared pipe says how many books that sound can write in 1 hour. TPRM that only asks about a smashed door will score the rail as strong on the morning the reserve account moves. A reserve account at the Central Bank of Brazil moved because the speaker was already licensed. Sinqia showed the same speaker class 2 months later, when legitimate IT provider credentials were enough to race a payment that already looked honest. Public loss figures are estimates. The mechanism does not need the last digit. TPRM has to inventory speaking keys, test whether real-time can be refused, and count how many institutions share the pipe before the next provider is treated as a quiet connector. Thank you.